Hello, welcome to another virtual program with Maine Historical Society. I'm Kathleen Newman, and it is February 2nd, 2022. And this is our program, Faces of Statehood Photographs in the Maine Historical Society Collections with Earle Shettleworth Jr. This is the first in a series of programs for celebrating 200 years of MHS. MHS is going to mark its 200th birthday officially this Saturday, February 5th. And we have a lot of wonderful programs planned for the year ahead. So visit mainehistory.org to check out all the upcoming programs and to register. And with us this evening is Earle Shettleworth Jr., a native, of Portland. Earle attended Deering High School, Colby College, and Boston University, and was a recipient of honorary degrees from Bowdoin College and the Maine College of Art. He became the architectural historian for the Maine Historic Preservation Commission in 1973 and director in 1976. He retired from that position in 2015. Mr. Shettleworth has lectured and written extensively on Maine history and architecture and has served as the state historian since 2004. It's always a pleasure to have him with us. Thanks so much for being here this evening, Earle.
Thank you very much, Kathleen. Before I begin, I just want to thank two staff members of the Maine Historical Society, Jamie Rice and Sophia Loris, for their great technical assistance in creating the images and the lecture that you're going to see this evening. And we're now switching over to share mode here.
There we go. All right, Earle, so we're ready to go. Whenever you're ready to advance to the next slide, you just signal me, okay?
I will indeed. Very good. So this evening, our topic is Faces of Statehood, mid-19th century photographs of Maine people in the collections of the Maine Historical Society. But before we begin to look at these way back historic images, I want to bring to your attention one more recent historical image, and that is of a wonderful person in my life, Elizabeth Ring. As the Maine Historical Society enters its 200th year, I would like to reflect on my nearly 60 years of membership in the organization. In the spring of 1963, my early interest in history came to the attention of Maine historian Elizabeth Ring, who was the Society's vice president, as well as chair of the Deering High School History Department. This resulted in her sponsoring me for membership at the age of 14 as I was finishing junior high school. To this day, I still don't know how she got me through the process of being accepted, but she did. That fall, I found myself in Miss Ring's high school history class, where she began to mentor me in the importance of local and state history. For 6 decades, I have turned to the Maine Historical Society to satisfy my intellectual curiosity about Maine's past. The Society is the single greatest repository of the state's collective memory, and it is my privilege to address you this evening on the eve of its 200th anniversary. My topic is Faces of Maine Statehood, an exploration of images of Maine people who contributed to the state's development during the first 50 years of statehood, between 1820 and 1870. We will come literally face to face with the well-known and not so well-known individuals who helped build the foundation of the state we enjoy today. These images are all part of the Maine Historical Society's extensive collection of early Maine photography dating from 1840 to 1870. That collection contains over 600 documented and identified images, many of them of individuals, including those that we'll see this evening. Maine photography begins in 1840. The invention of photography was unveiled by Louis Daguerre in the fall of 1839 in Paris, and it was quickly brought to America. And literally within a few months of its arriving in this country, the first photographer had crossed the Piscataqua River into southern Maine and started taking pictures. And as we like to say, the rest is history. Daguerreotypes, the first form of photography, were plates of copper that were coated in silver and then exposed to the light with proper chemicals and created an image. Those are usually from the period of 1840, the earliest period, to about 1855. Then they were followed briefly by ambrotypes, which are glass photographs that are put on a black background in order to make them a full positive. And then very quickly, at the same time that ambrotypes were coming in the 1850s, the glass negative, which was so dominant in photography from the late 19th century into the 20th century, was invented also in the 1850s. Now, many of the people that we're going to see this evening are images of individuals in old age. We're talking about people who, and in a few cases, I'll go back and give their birth dates. We have individuals going back as far as the 1740s and 50s who had their pictures taken in the 1840s and 50s. And so brace yourself. In many cases, these are individuals who are in the last years of their lives, but fortunately the camera has captured their image, and we know what they looked like along with their contributions to the development of the state. Our first photograph tonight falls under the category of political leaders. We're going to be looking at a number of the early political leaders of the state. This is William King of Bath, merchant, shipbuilder, military leader, and politician. A leading proponent of Maine statehood, he became our first governor in 1820, serving until 1821. King secured Boston architect Charles Bulfinch to design the State House in Augusta in 1828 and oversaw the beginning of its construction in 1829. He was one of the charter members of the Maine Historical Society in 1822. And I can remember Elizabeth Ring saying to me about the founders of the Maine Historical Society, for the Maine Historical Society is the third oldest state historical society in America, that the men who created Maine in 1820, who went to the great effort of separating from Massachusetts, creating a constitution and starting a new government, that their efforts, they did not want them to be forgotten. And so 2 years later, they created the Maine Historical Society so that the fresh history that they had created would be preserved for the future. And now we're at a point where 200 years almost have passed. Now, most of the images tonight have survived in remarkably good condition, but occasionally through the way the photographer processed the picture, the way it might have been exposed to the light, the way it was treated and cared for over decades would result in a deterioration. And here we have a case of an extremely rare and wonderful photograph that recently entered the collection of Albion Keith Parris, shown at the right, with his wife, Sarah Whitman Parris. He was Maine's 5th governor, serving from 1822 to 1827. A lawyer, Parris pursued a life of public service as a congressman, senator, Maine Supreme Court justice, and second comptroller of the currency for the U.S. Treasury, a post he held from 1836 to 1850. He was the Maine Historical Society's first president in 1822. So we literally had the governor of Maine in 1822 also being the first president of the society. That linkage between the earliest period of statehood and the men who created the Maine Historical Society. Enoch Lincoln died in 1829, a decade before the invention of photography. Thus, his image is known only through portraits painted during his lifetime, including this one that has survived through a daguerreotype copy. An attorney, Lincoln practiced law in Oxford County before serving in the Congress from 1819 to 1827. As Maine's sixth governor from 1827 to 1829, he worked to settle the Northeast boundary dispute with Great Britain. Governor Lincoln was a man of letters who published poetry and historical research. Like a couple of the others who we've just talked about, he was a charter member of Maine Historical in 1822. Jonathan Huntoon was Maine's ninth governor, serving from 1830 to 1831. A lawyer who practiced in Reedfield and Dixmont, he is remembered for his advocacy to establish the state's first mental hospital. Robert P. Dunlap served as Maine's 11th governor from 1834 to 1838. He graduated from Bowdoin College in 1815, studied law, and was admitted to the bar in 1818. 3 years later, he was elected president of the overseers of Bowdoin College, a post he held for the rest of his life until his death in 1859. His public service included 3 terms as State Senate president and 2 terms in the Congress. He joined the Maine Historical Society in 1828. Reuel Williams practiced law in his native city of Augusta from 1804 until his death in 1862. As an influential member of the Maine legislature in the 1820s, he succeeded in making Augusta the state capital in 1827. 4 years later, he oversaw the completion of the State House as Commissioner of Public Buildings. He also served Maine in the U.S. Senate from 1839 to 1843. Hannibal Hamlin was a native of Paris Hill, who moved to Hamden as a young man to practice law. He began his political career in the Maine legislature, serving 3 terms as Speaker. He was elected to Congress in 1843 and to the Senate in 1848. During the 1856 campaign, he won the governorship as a Republican, a new party then, but resigned to return to the Senate. Hannibal Hamlin's anti-slavery reputation and his identification with the northeasternmost state made him a logical running mate for Abraham Lincoln in 1860. Hamlin served as vice president during Lincoln's first term. Maine voters returned Hamlin to the Senate in 1869, where he remained until his retirement in 1881. This, by the way, is actually a lithograph of Hamlin, a campaign lithograph that was made into an ambrotype, and there would have been a companion ambrotype of Abraham Lincoln. This was actually a piece of campaign material from the campaign of 1860, this particular image. William Pitt Pheasant of Portland graduated from Bowdoin College in 1823 and became one of Maine's most successful attorneys. Between 1831 and 1854, he served in the Maine legislature and the U.S. Congress. Elected to the Senate in 1854, he gained a national reputation for his opposition to slavery and his expertise in finance. His role as chair of the Senate Finance Committee during the Civil War led Abraham Lincoln to appoint him as the Secretary of the Treasury, a post he held for a year before returning to the Senate for the balance of his life. He became a Maine Historical Society member in 1846. And I think from the biographies that we've just looked at, from the first few images in our presentation, we can already gather that politically, Maine had a very important role to play, not only in its own statehood development, but also in the national scene of the pre-Civil War period. These next 2 images are really great fun. This first one I'll show you of the Log Cabin and Hard Cider Club. This was a Whig political organization founded in Portland during the 1840 presidential campaign. That year, the Whig candidate was General William Henry Harrison, whose patrician Virginia background was transformed into the more appealing image of a frontier common man who lived in a log cabin and drank hard cider. What this overlooked was that he had a family mansion on the James River in Virginia. Well, Harrison died only a month after taking office in 1841. Log cabin and hide cider remained a party trademark until the demise of the Whigs in the 1850s. And so here are a group of Portland gentlemen. There are about 29 of them who are assembled in a photographer's studio to memorialize the fact that they were part of this political organization. And we have another example of a daguerreotype of Portland's log cabin and hard cider club, this one taken in 1853. Now we turn to individuals who were involved in the military history of early Maine. We look first at Conrad Hare of Waldoboro. In 1749, Conrad Hare was the first white child born in Waldoboro, a German immigrant community. In December 1775, he joined the 25th Continental Regiment and served for a year in the American Revolution, participating in the campaigns against the British in New York State and Canada. Returning to Maine in 1776, he settled on his farm in Waldoboro, where he never experienced a day of sickness until shortly before his death in 1856 at the age of 107. This daguerreotype in the Maine Historical Society collection is considered to be one of the earliest surviving images of an individual who goes way back into the colonial period. Again, bear in mind, this individual was born in 1749. Another revolutionary soldier, the Rev John Sawyer of Bangor, joined the Continental Army in 1777 and participated in the Saratoga campaign. After the Revolution, he entered Dartmouth College, graduating in 1786. Ordained in 1787, he arrived in Maine in 1806, where he served as a minister in Boothbay, Newcastle, Bangor, and Garland. He died in 1858 in Bangor at the age of 103, having been born in 1755. This is a faded, what we would call an albumen photograph. This is our first example of a paper photograph that was made from a negative, and it dates from 1860 when the glass plate negative process was just coming in. This gentleman, Ralph Farnham, was born in Lebanon in 1756. At the age of 18, in May 1775, he enlisted in Colonel James Scammond's regiment. The regiment reached Cambridge on June 16th, but did not participate in the Battle of Bunker Hill the next day. Farnham fought with the Continental Army through 1777, including Saratoga, where he witnessed the surrender of General Burgoyne. After his service, he returned to Maine to his farm in Acton, where he lived until his death in 1861 at the age of 104. Simon Dearborn, born in 1760, served from early 1777 to December 1779 in the 3rd New Hampshire Regiment. He was present at Burgoyne's surrender at Saratoga. After the Revolution, he settled in Monmouth, where he was a selectman and represented the town in the Massachusetts General Court before Maine statehood. The Reverend Elijah Kellogg Sr., born in 1761, enlisted in the Continental Army in 1775, and for the next 5 years saw action in such battles as Lexington, White Plains, and Ticonderoga. Following his graduation from Dartmouth College in 1785, Kellogg served from 1788 to 1811 as the minister of the Second Parish Church in Portland. The balance of his career was spent as a missionary organizing churches throughout Maine. And perhaps his son, Elijah Kellogg Jr., is better known for his 28 books that he published from the 1860s to the 1890s on life in Maine for juvenile readers. Now we turn to the War of 1812. And this image of Isaac Hodson of Corinth is another relatively recent acquisition by the Society. Isaac Hodson served as an officer in the U.S. Army during the War of 1812. He later became the Major General who commanded the Maine militia in the Aroostook War of 1839. His adopted son, John Littlefield Hodson, was the state's Adjutant General during the Civil War. Many of us will immediately recognize this image. For Joshua Chamberlain has become one of the most famous Mainers in our history. Joshua L. Chamberlain of Brewer and Brunswick was a Bowdoin College graduate and professor, colonel of the 20th Maine Regiment at Little Round Top at the Battle of Gettysburg, four-term governor, and president of Bowdoin College. We see him here in a profile photograph, what we would call a carte de visite, which is a small paper photograph done with a glass plate negative, and then it could be mass produced. These were very popular during the Civil War. It's a very striking and handsome image. I should also add that when General Chamberlain came back from the war in 1865, he joined the Maine Historical Society. A wonderful ambrotype image of Oliver Otis Howard of Leeds at the left in the military uniform. Howard was a Bowdoin College graduate and West Point graduate, fought in 6 major Civil War battles and 3 campaigns. After the war, directed the Freedmen's Bureau to integrate former slaves into American society and founded Howard University in Washington, D.C. The 2 young men with him are his brothers. This remarkable group photograph has as its center Neal Dow of Portland. This was taken in 1862 in Boston of Dow as the commander of the 13th Maine Regiment with his field and staff officers surrounding him. A noted temperance advocate and politician, Dow was appointed by Governor Israel Washburn Jr. in 1861 to command the 13th Maine. The regiment saw action in Louisiana and Mississippi, where Dow was captured by the Confederates in 1863, held in Libby Prison in Richmond, and exchanged the following year for General Robert E. Lee's son. And now we turn to some not so famous Mainers who in both cases made the supreme sacrifice for their state and their union. Private Charles H. Ring of Newport, born in 1844, was an 18-year-old carriage trimmer when he enlisted as a musician in the 16th Maine Regiment in August of 1862. He died of disease in Maryland just 3.5 months later. And then we have Sergeant Nelson W. Jones, who grew up on a farm in Palermo and enlisted at the age of 18 as a private in the 3rd Maine Regiment. He fought in such major battles as First Bull Run, Second Bull Run, Fredericksburg, and Chancellorsville before being killed at Gettysburg on July 2nd, 1863. He is buried with 103 other Maine soldiers in the Gettysburg National Cemetery. This is a wonderful tintype of Sergeant Jones, illustrating that it was probably taken in one of the many field photography studios. The photographers followed the armies, and the young men had their photographs taken to send home. As you can see, he's actually looks like he's standing. He may even be standing on ground, and there is a painted backdrop with an American flag and some army tents in the background, and he is standing pretty much at attention as very proud of the fact that he's a young sergeant. Now we turn to images that represent Mainers of the early period who were in professions and occupations. John Merrick was born in London in 1766 and moved to Hollowell in 1798 to join his in-laws, the Vaughan family. An educator and a Renaissance man, Merrick worked tirelessly to improve Hollowell Academy and found time for business, public service, astronomy, geology, anatomy, music, dance, elocution, and athletics. He was a founding member of the Maine Historical Society in 1822. Parker Cleveland achieved an international reputation in the scientific community for his 1816 book, Elementary Treatise on Mineralogy and Geology, the first American publication on the subject. A 1798 Harvard graduate, Cleveland joined the Bowdoin College faculty in 1805 to teach mathematics, chemistry, geology, and medicine. When he died in 1858, in the 53rd year of his professorship, the college estimated that he had taught more than 2,000 students. He also was a founding member of the society in 1822. The Reverend Jotham Sewell of Chesterville served for more than 50 years as a congregational minister and missionary, helping to found churches throughout Maine. His life and work are recorded in a memoir published in 1853. Here's another example of a daguerreotype that has had a bit of a hard life, but we still have a very strong image coming through. This is Captain James Patton, who moved in his youth from his native Thompson to Bath to become a seaman. He rose to command vessels, chiefly those built by his brothers John and George Patton, and became a member of the family shipbuilding firm. Captain Patton stands in tonight for the literally hundreds of mariners and shipbuilders who played such an important role in the early years of Maine statehood. These two men in their work clothes represent a force of hundreds each year who drove logs down the Penobscot River to Old Town, where they were sawn into lumber, clapboards, shingles, and lathes. These river drivers posed with their tools of their trade, a peavey, an axe, a pike pole, and a shovel. This particular image is a little bit different than either daguerreotypes, ambrotypes, or the albumin photographs made from glass plate negatives. This actually is the photograph which is processed onto a piece of tin. And this process is known as the tintype, and it was very popular in the period of the Civil War. Tintypes were very quickly and cheaply made. And as you can see, it also can scar very easily the surface, particularly if it isn't protected. But nonetheless, we are so fortunate that this particular remarkable image of two Maine working men of around 1860 has survived for us today. Another image that we know through a tintype, because this tintype is a copy of an earlier photograph, a daguerreotype, is of Johnny Stringer, an English artisan who settled in Hollowell in the early 19th century. He earned his livelihood by making and repairing chairs and manufacturing clothespins. Each Monday morning, he appeared with this basket of clothespins to sell to local housewives on the waterfront of Hollowell. He also made dolls' cradles and bedsteads for the children of the town. Benjamin F. Cunningham of Freedom, a cabinet maker, was photographed with his arm resting on a miniature Empire bureau to the right. Cunningham made furniture in Freedom from the 1840s through the 1860s. During the 19th century, membership in a local volunteer fire company was a matter of great pride, resulting in many men having their photographs taken in uniform. This young fireman from Skowhegan is dressed in a red jacket with his hat resting on the table next to him. Skowhegan began in 1860 to maintain a fully equipped firehouse in the downtown. In the mid-19th century, Maine, music flourished through the efforts of individual musicians and local musical groups, especially bands. Charles Thompson of South Berwick proudly displays his over-the-shoulder soprano horn, a band instrument of the period. Fraternal orders enjoyed widespread popularity in Maine prior to the Civil War, and many members were photographed in their lodge regalia. This man wears an elaborately decorated Masonic vestment and apron, The photographer has taken great pains to highlight the details of these garments with touches of gold paint. Now let us turn to the arts. And of course, with the Maine Historical Society as our venue this evening, we could not start the arts without Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, the most popular American literary figure of the 19th century. A native of Portland, he graduated from Bowdoin College and taught languages there and at Harvard. Longfellow left academia in 1854 to devote the rest of his life to writing poetry. By the time of his death, he enjoyed an international reputation with his poems translated into many languages. Here we see him seated on the porch of his summer home at Nahant in 1856. And this is a very rare and early glass stereopticon view. There would be a companion double frame or image to the left or right of this image. We thought tonight we just wanted to zero in on the poet. And of course, this shows the poet prior to the early 1860s when he had the great tragedy in his life, and it resulted in his growing his great beard. But a wonderful, rare image. And again, Longfellow joined the Maine Historical Society in 1831. And in 1834, while he was teaching at Bowdoin, he was the Society's fourth librarian. Seba Smith gained national fame as a political satirist who wrote newspaper articles and books under the pen name of Jack Downing. A native of Buckfield, Smith rose from a modest rural background to graduate from Bowdoin College in 1818. As a newspaper editor, he started the Portland Courier in 1829, in which he published his Jack Downing letters. When the letters first appeared in book form in 1833, Smith's brand of political writing captured national attention and launched his 35-year career as a widely read American humorist. John Neal of Portland, shown here with his family, was Maine's 19th century Renaissance man. In his long, active life, he was a writer, a poet, a critic, an art and literary critic, an editor, a lawyer, a lecturer, an entrepreneur, an architect, and an art patron. His causes ranged from the arts to women's rights, from abolition to gymnastics. He is best remembered for his 1869 biography, Wandering Recollections of a Somewhat Busy Life, and his 1874 chronicle of his native city, Portland Illustrated. William Willis practiced law in Portland for nearly 50 years, during which time he served as a state senator and mayor of the city. Willis's primary interest, however, was Maine history. An early president of the Maine Historical Society, joining in 1828, he edited the first 6 volumes of its collections. His 1865 History of Portland remains a major source of local history, as are his extensive newspaper writings and his personal diaries. John Greenleaf Cloudman was a Portland artist who painted portraits and landscapes. Trained by the pioneer Portland artist Charles Codman, Cloudman began his long career in the 1830s. In the 1840s and 50s, he made 2 trips to Paris, where he furthered his artistic education and copied old master paintings in the Louvre. He also traveled to California in the 1850s to paint pictures of Native Americans. Paul Akers, a Westbrook native, gained a national reputation as a sculptor in the 1850s. After studying in Boston in 1849, Akers returned to Portland to model busts of prominent Maine citizens. In 1852, he made his first of 3 extended visits to Europe. While in Rome, he created his most famous works, St. Elizabeth of Hungary, now at the Colby College Museum of Art, and the Dead Pearl Diver, on view at the Portland Museum of Art. Akers' promising career ended prematurely in his death from tuberculosis at the age of 34. Charles Stewart Davies, an 1807 Bowdoin graduate, was an attorney who was active in the settlement of the Northeast boundary dispute with Great Britain. This bust of Davies was made by Paul Akers, who displayed it in his Portland studio in 1849. And we end our consideration of the arts with this gentleman, Charles Q. Clapp of Portland. Charles Q. Clapp was the son of Asa Clapp, the city's wealthiest resident during the first half of the 19th century. Between the 1820s and the 1860s, Charles Clapp used his family's resources to develop local real estate, filing more than 600 land transactions in the Cumberland County Registry. When Clapp died in 1868, his obituary noted that, quote, his natural inclination led him to improve his real estate. Possessing an unusual taste for architecture, every building erected under his auspices was designed by himself. He is best remembered today for his own Greek Revival style house of 1832 on Spring Street, now owned by the Portland Museum of Art, known as the Clapp House. Now, early photographs from the 1840 to the 1870 period are quite rare in regard to representing the diversity of Maine populations. But we're fortunate in the Maine Historical Society to have several examples. Here we find a rare example of an early photograph of Black Maine residents in this picture of a well-dressed young couple, John and Sarah Williams Young, taken in Hollowell in the 1860s. Little is known about the Youngs beyond John's listing as a laborer in period business directories. Shown in their dooryard at 249 Congress Street in Portland are, from left, Dr. George H. Chadwick and his brother Samuel Chadwick. At the right is a third Chadwick brother, William. The young Black groom holding the blanket is identified as a native of Cuba. The photograph dates from about 1860. This is another of the very popular small formatted photographs known as the carte de visite that were so popular during the Civil War. And this one shows Henry Daniels, who served as an officer's valet at Fort Preble in Cape Elizabeth, now South Portland, during the war. Born a slave in Virginia, Davis was living in Portland by 1850, where he worked as a cook and a caterer. This photograph of a young Wabanaki man was taken in Hollowell in the 1860s. Probably a member of the Penobscot Nation from Old Town, he wears the customary dress of 19th century Native American men, a belted tunic over a pair of trousers. His garments are embellished by armbands, a decorative border at the base of the tunic, and a sash with a brooch. A headdress with vertical feathers completes his attire. And I'm very happy to be able to share with you tonight this remarkable image of Father Eugene Vetromile. This is, again, a recent addition to the Society's collection. Father Vetromile was born in Italy and joined the Jesuit order there in 1840. Between 1840 and 1848, he studied for the priesthood at Georgetown University in the District of Columbia. Ordained in 1848, he was assigned as a missionary to the Penobscot Nation at Old Town in 1854. There he found Father Edmond de Millier's research on native language and began the philological studies that resulted in his three books, Indian Good Book of 1857, of Vetromile's Noble Bible, 1860, and the Abenaki and Their History, 1866. Now let us turn to a few family groups. And these were very popular, whether it was a small family or a large gathering of a family. So oftentimes these group pictures were created as mementos of family gatherings or family comings together. Here we're looking at a well-dressed family posed for a Bangor photographer in the 1850s. Their identity is unknown, and if you look closely, particularly at the father, second in from the left, and the son, first in from the right, equally mysterious is the meaning of the hand signals displayed by father and oldest son. They may have had some family significance, or they could have indicated membership in a fraternal order. Let's hope that it's either one of those. In contrast to the well-dressed family that we just saw from Bangor, we now look at another family from Bangor, probably more in the middle range of life in the city. More modestly attired is the family of Bangor bookseller, Oliver R. Patch at the right. This three-generational picture places a grandmother in the center, flanked by a mother and father. Two boys stand behind them, and a third sits in front of his father. One of our great family groups in the Maine Historical Society collection is this of Lucretia Day Sewell, the daughter of merchant Ezekiel Day of Portland. She married Caius Sewell in 1836. A Bowdoin-educated attorney, he practiced law in Mobile, Alabama for 2 decades before the Civil War. And this photograph shows Lucretia with 5 of their children. It's so beautifully posed and so clear and so poignant an image. It's one of the rare images where you really feel the presence of the individuals who are looking out from their daguerreotype 150 to 175 years ago. Another very nicely posed daguerreotype of a family group is the Anna Margaret Hallwell Deering photograph of Portland, surrounded by her daughters. In 1824, Margaret married Nathaniel Deering, an attorney, author, editor, composer, and dramatist. The Deerings had 9 children, of whom their 5 daughters appear surrounding their mother in this photograph. And in contrast to Anna Deering and her very well-dressed Portland daughters, we have, in contrast to the fashionable Deerings, the modest attire of Elizabeth P. Judkins and her 4 daughters. The wife of a farmer, Benjamin Judkins of Palmyra, Elizabeth stares pensively into the camera, setting a serious tone reflected in the expressions of her girls. These are the faces hardened by the experience of life in pre-Civil War rural Maine. And now a group of children's portraits. Alice Jane Means was the daughter of Sea Captain Thomas Means and his wife Rebecca. The 4th of 6 children, Alice resided in Portland throughout her life. She was born in 1844, so this would probably put this daguerreotype at maybe right around the late 40s or around 1850. Now, all during the evening, you've been treated to one image after another where the subjects are pretty grim in their appearance. Part of this may have been, at least in the earlier photographs, the time it took to sit before the photographer. Part of it was just the seriousness of facing the camera for the first time, and the idea that you were going to be immortalized for all time. And then, of course, there was also just the whole ethic of the period where, you know, seriousness and religiosity were very important. But not so with Sadie O. Gould. As we see here, this is an informal pose and a smiling face of this young Portland girl. The photograph has captured the spirit of childhood in this picture, taken about 1860. And part of the charm of this image comes from seeing so small a child in so large a Victorian chair. This photograph of Anna Goodrich in 1853 conveys the energy of a 2.5-year-old child, perhaps having tried in vain to pose Anna in his elaborately carved studio chair to the left. The photographer has allowed her to sit on the adjacent table. There she stares into the camera. Anna eventually married James Woodford and became a member of the family who gave its name to Woodford's Corner section of Portland. And this lovely portrait, which we actually began the evening with, from the age of 21 in 1833 until his death in 1889, Thomas Shaw spent his life in the business world of Portland as a wholesale grocer. In contrast, this photograph of his wife, Sarah Merrill Shaw, at 16, indicates her interest in the arts, for she rests a print on her lap as she faces the camera. And she's both beautifully posed and really very effectively photographed. It's a lovely image, and it owes a great deal on the part of the photographer to the posing of oil portraits of the period. And of course, a lot of the impetus of photography comes out of the oil portrait tradition. Lavinia Simpson of Jonesboro is another recent addition to our collection, and we welcome her. She is a very handsome young lady, probably well into her teens, handsomely dressed in this kind of sateen dress. And not only do we have her name inscribed on the inside of the case, in which holds her photograph, but also the date 1858. Small children were, as we've already seen, a challenging subject for the photographer. Here is a presumably brother and sister portrait done in Portland in the 1850s. And finally, the two sons of James Fowler of Unity. This is an ambrotype of about 1860. All I can say is I think I see a little bit of mischief in these eyes, particularly at the right, but it's a charming child portrait. Now we end with, in a sense, a non-Mainer, but in one of the great treasures of the Maine Historical Society's early photograph collection. Daguerreotype of Dolly Madison, born in 1768, died in 1849. She is remembered as one of America's greatest first ladies. Her second husband, James Madison, served as President Thomas Jefferson's Secretary of State from 1801 to 1809, succeeding him in the presidency in 1809 to 1817. During both the Jefferson and Madison administrations, Dolly Madison conducted the social life of the White House. When the British burned Washington in 1814, she rescued the full-length portrait of George Washington from the East Room. Dolly Madison's sister, Anna, was married to Richard Cutts of Saco, and the Maine Historical Society probably acquired this daguerreotype of Dolly from the Cutts family. There is a very strong chance that this was probably one of the early photographic works of the famous Civil War photographer, Matthew Brady. And so we end with Zip the dog. Family pets were as treasured in the 1840s as they are today, and their owners sought to capture their images by means of photography. Zip the bull terrier, shown here, belonged to Dr. Sumner Cummings. Born in Waterford, Dr. Cummings graduated from Bowdoin College in 1823 and practiced medicine in Portland with his father, Dr. Stephen Cummings, until his death in 1849. Regrettably, the Cummings family genealogy contains no biographical information about Zip, but at least we have his daguerreotype portrait. So I thank you very much for joining me in this journey through the faces of Maine statehood. And I'd be happy to try and answer any questions that you might have. Thank you.
Thank you, Earl. We do have some time for a few questions from the audience. One audience member is asking, do we know how many charter members of MHS were there?
Good question. I unfortunately, well, wait a minute. I put it right here. I do have, I don't know whether I actually can give you the number, but I do have the list here that Jamie provided me with. Let me just quickly, it was quite a few actually. Let me just get this list here. Oh, here we go. Yes. Sorry to take so long here.
Okay.
If I'd known this question was coming, I would have a surprising number. I would say 2, 4, 6, 8. I would say that the charter members took up about a page and 3/4. So let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. About 50.
About 50. Very good.
Yep.
That is a lot,
Yep.
actually. Yeah.
Including many of the most prominent men in Maine at the time. Yep.
Someone else is saying there were several photographs from Hallowell. Was there a studio there, or maybe just a treasure trove in somebody's attic of Hallowell?
Yes. Oh, well, very, very good question. There was a studio there. It was, well, there were, of course, what I should say is that almost every town and city across Maine by the time of the Civil War had at least one photography studio. Photography spread like wildfire, of course, through the whole country, but Maine as well, in the period from 1840 to 1860. The images that I referred to from Hallowell, particularly the young Black couple and the Native American, those two were taken somewhere from about 1862, maybe to 1864 or 5. 62 is the year in which I guess it was, Augustus F. Morse set up his studio in Hallowell. And those two images came directly through his family to the Maine Historical Society. But there was a studio. It was the Morse studio, and those were created by A.F. Morse in the Civil War period.
Thank you. Another great question. Photographs used to be so rare and precious. How does the ubiquity of photographic images impact the way we collect and interpret history?
Very good question. that may very well be that may be a question for another whole lecture or discussion about how and why we collect photographs. I would just say that it's very interesting how the Maine Historical Society came to have this remarkable collection that it has of well over 600 images, in that there were really two paths. The first was that the Maine Historical Society, as best we can tell, began collecting what we now view as these rare daguerreotypes, ambrotypes, and then later on paper photographs, stereopticon views, all kinds of types of photographs, as documents during the 19th and in the early 20th century. It was recognized early on that it was important that the photograph was a useful tool for preserving history. And so consequently, over many decades, the Maine Historical Society came to have several hundred of these wonderful images. And many of them came in as gifts from families, because back 40, 50, 75, 100 years ago, people were not studying photographs for their own sake. They were saving them because they were of your family. And the Maine Historical Society often received groups of family papers. And at the same time, early photographs of the family members would be included in the gift as well. So what it's meant in recent years, as we appreciate these on several levels, is going back into these family collections and locating them. We've found some of our treasures that we saw tonight that were actually came in with family collections. And then I hesitate to draw attention to myself, but seriously, what happened in the early 2000s was that I had been collecting Maine documented photographs for many years, and also my good friend James Vickery. And when James died in 1997, he left me his collection. Between the two collections, we ended up with about 300 more of these documented images. And in 2005 to about 2007, I turned them over to the Society as the Vickery Shettleworth collection of early Maine photography. So I felt that it was so important to strengthen the great collection that the Society already had, so that if anyone in the long-term future studies the history of Maine photography, the Maine Historical Society will be probably the single greatest resource for them in terms of the early photographs that we talked about tonight.
Do you know about how many photographs are estimated to be in MHS's collection?
I don't know for sure. I just know that when we were working specifically, Jamie's
Jamie,
just
our
flagged on it.
deputy
Oh,
director,
good.
yeah, and director of collections.
Jamie's helping us out with this one.
Yeah, she says
1100.
about
All right,
1100.
very
Yeah.
good, very
Thank
good.
you, Jamie.
Okay, fine, very good. Yeah, yeah.
And her, Earl, you are also one of the authors of Maine Photography, a History,
Yes.
1840 to 2015, with Libby Bischoff and Susan Danley. And I've posted a link if anyone's interested, that's available through our museum store. And that's another great resource on Maine photography. Someone else in the audience is asking, they've been looking for years for Edward Anthony's daguerreotypes of the disputed area in northern Maine
Oh,
around
yes.
1840.
I do know
Supposedly,
about the. Oh,
okay,
yeah.
supposedly in the
No.
National Archives, but do you know anything else where they?
I don't. I certainly know of them. I've read about them, but I've not seen them. No. If anyone out in the audience knows more about them, it'd be wonderful to share it with us, because those would have to be among the earliest documented photographs, both in terms of Maine, bearing in mind that the first photographers who come to Maine are in 1840. And then in addition to that, they would be among the first of a government expedition.
Yeah.
You know, of course, photography became a very important factor as we went west with the various exploration expeditions in the 1850s, and then after the Civil War in the 1860s and 70s. But that expedition up to the boundary, that would have to be one of the first on record in the country's history. Yeah.
We saw a couple photographs tonight that were in not as good a condition as some of the others. Someone's asking, can photographs like those be restored, or is it really just a matter of keeping them from degrading even more?
Well, I think the original physical photograph itself, probably the best you can do is to stabilize it as it is. However, with our modern techniques of digitization, if you choose to go another step, and of course you want to make it very clear, you know, what's the original image, but it actually has been available for some time to quote unquote restore faded images or deteriorated images, and I've even in a couple cases had this done myself. So it is possible to enhance an image that has deteriorated, but we would not actually act directly upon the image itself, but just use the non-invasive digitization processes. Yeah.
Do you know, we've got time for maybe just a couple more here.
Oh, sure.
Is there a collection of Civil War photographs of individual Maine soldiers, like specifically for someone who's looking for an ancestor?
Absolutely. Online through the Maine State Archives, just go to the Maine State Archives website. There's a wonderful website of, well, I think it's probably somewhere between 1,000 and 2,000 images now, and they're all identified. They are, I think, set up in alphabetical order. so that if you are looking for an ancestor, you could probably determine pretty quickly whether or not he's there or not. Now, bear in mind, and this is the great challenge when you get to these Civil War photographs, is that there were over 70,000 individuals who participated in the Civil War in Maine, and in no way to take away from the wonderful effort that the archives has made, but they might have gathered 2,000 out of these 70,000. So if your ancestor isn't there, don't feel too bad. There are a lot of images that we're still looking for, but nonetheless, that is an excellent site, and it is gathered from several sources. One of the principal sources is that I showed General Isaac Hodson. And I mentioned that his father was adjutant general during the Civil War. One of the amazing things that Hodson did with his one or two assistants that he had in his office was to collect carte de visite photographs of almost all of the officers that served for Maine in Maine regiments during the Civil War, and then miraculously saved them, and they survived into the present day. And they're a principal part of that that website. Plus, there was a great collector of Civil War photographs, Tom McDonald from Eustis, who passed away a few years ago, and his widow very kindly assented for the archives to scan his entire collection, which again was, I think it was probably over 1,000 identified images. And there are 2 or 3 other major collections in public and private hands of identified Civil War soldiers. It's a subject that fascinates me, and I wish we could I wish we could bring more of those collections into the fore.
Someone else is asking, would we encourage folks who have family photos of Maine Civil War soldiers and politicians to sign up as an individual participant to Maine Memory Network? And the answer is yes.
Oh, yes. No, we would. This is how every day the society, and then those of the historical field in Maine, learn. I mean, there is still so much out there. I mean, I have been interested in collecting Maine-related material since I went into my first antique shop when I was 7 years old in Bingham, Maine, and I've never looked back. And yet I don't pretend to even begin to know where it all is. And we really need everybody's help in this effort. And if you do have documented family photographs, and they don't have to be a famous person either. I mean, we as you saw tonight, I tried to also show you some images of people who live daily lives in Maine, who maybe didn't go to Congress or didn't fight in the war or whatever. And those images, if they're documented, if we know who they were from Maine, they have just as much value and interest to the Maine Historical Society and to historians. We learn so much from looking at photographs.
Absolutely.
Really.
Yeah. So for those of you that haven't had a chance, or who you might be interested in contributing your own family history, if you visit mainmemory.net, you can first of all, you can see a lot of the photographs that were in Earle's presentation tonight and more. And you can learn how you yourself can become an individual contributing partner and participate in sharing historic materials on that database. That's also where you'll find My Maine Stories, where anybody can share their story about Maine, whether it's their own personal story or memories of their parents or grandparents. We want to encourage everyone who's got materials and a story to share. Visit Maine Memory Network and please participate. And yes, for someone who's asking in the chat, it's definitely easy to use Maine Memory to find photographs. And for anybody who's got questions that maybe we didn't have a chance to get to tonight, or if you want to learn more about Maine Memory Network and how to use it, I've put my email address in the chat. It's kneumann@mainehistory.org, KNEUMA Please reach out to me at any time, and we would love to talk to you more and try and point you in the right direction to answer all your questions. Earle, again, thank you so much for getting such great feedback in the chat. People really loved and appreciated this presentation, myself included. So thank you so much for being here, sharing your time and expertise. We look forward to having you back.
Thank you very much for having me. I've enjoyed it very much. Thank you.
It was our pleasure. Thank you everyone for being here, and hope we will see you back real soon.